Hello, welcome to my continuing read-through of the book The Baha'i Faith, A Short History. This one dealing with Chapter 5 on Baha'u'llah. As before, I've divided the chapter into two videos for ease of recording. The chapter itself is part of a series of four dealing with the establishment of the Baha'i Faith up to about 1921. So this is Chapter 5 on Baha'u'llah. That will be followed by Chapter 6 on the writings and teachings of Baha'u'llah, then 7 Abdul Baha, and 8 Baha'i communities up to roughly 1921. So now let's move to Chapter 5. I've divided the chapter into 5 sections. We'll deal with the first two in this video, the other two in the second video. So Baha'u'llah and the revival of Babism from 1853 to 1866, the emergence of the Baha'i Faith from 1866 onwards, then the Akka period and the growth of the Baha'i community. We have already discussed in the previous chapters the dramatic rise of the Babi movement in mid-19th century Iran from 1844 onwards, and its equally dramatic collapse when it was all but destroyed by the government forces under the Qajar dynasty. What remained was a divided and presumably dispirited remnant who were reeling under the major reverses they had just suffered and faced the real possibility of continued persecution. Their nominal leader was the youthful Mirza Yahya Nouri, now better known by his title Subazal, but in reality there was no unitary movement left. The revival of the Babi movement was largely the result of Subazal's elder half-brother, Mirza Hussein Ali Nouri, now better known by his religious title of Baha'u'llah. So Baha'u'llah is the subject of this chapter. Baha'u'llah, the title means the splendor or glory of God, was the religious title of Mirza Hussein Ali Nouri, the son of a landowning notable and former courtier and provincial governor called Mirza Abbas, known as Mirza Buzurg Nouri. Hussein Ali, who had been born in 1817, was one of the most socially prominent of the Babis. Converting in 1844, he was able to use his wealth and social position to provide support and protection to his co-religionists, becoming one of the few non-clerics to occupy a position of importance and authority within the movement. You'll remember that most of the Babi leaders were clerics. After the Bab's execution, Baha'u'llah's younger half-brother, Subazal, went into hiding and was unable to maintain the unity of the Babis. A variety of claimants to supreme authority then emerged, based on the expected appearance of a further messianic figure after the Bab. Although he opposed the plottings of the more militant Babis, Hussein Ali was one of those arrested in the aftermath of the attempt on the Shah's life. For 4 months, he was imprisoned under dreadful conditions with other Babis in the underground prison in Tehran called the Black Pit, Siachal. Here, according to his own later account, he experienced initiatory visions. For much of the time, the heavy weight of his chains and the awful stench of the place kept him awake, but when he did sleep, he felt that a torrent flowed down from his head over his body, and every limb was set afire. He then, in his words, recited what no man could bear to hear. He also saw a sweet-voiced heavenly maiden who informed all in creation that he was the beauty of God and the power of God's sovereignty. Her voice assured him that God would render him victorious. Through the efforts of powerful relatives and friends, Baha'u'llah's release from the prison was eventually secured. Deprived of his property and refusing an offer of asylum in Russia, he was then exiled from Iranian territory. He went to Baghdad in Ottoman Iraq, arriving there in April 1853. What happened next is interpreted differently by the followers of Baha'u'llah, that is the Baha'is, and those of Subazal, that is the Azali Babis. What seems certain is that Baha'u'llah now began to eclipse Azal as a leader, and that the latter increasingly resented this, but insisted on remaining hidden from most of the Babis for his own protection. Distressed by the resultant tensions, Baha'u'llah withdrew from Baghdad in April 1854, preferring to live a more or less solitary life as a dervish for 2 years in the mountains of Kurdistan. While there, he came into contact with local Sufi leaders, however, and rumors of his whereabouts began to trickle back to his family, who begged him to return. He arrived back in Baghdad in March 1856 and was very quickly recognized as the preeminent Babi leader, both by the Babis and by the Iranian and Ottoman authorities. During the next 7 years, Baha'u'llah worked to reinvigorate the Babi movement in Iran. Living under the relative safety of Ottoman control, Baha'u'llah was able to receive Babi visitors from Iran and encourage the various Babi groups through an increasing correspondence. He also attracted a band of dedicated personal disciples and wrote several books that had a major and widespread appeal for the Babis. Chief amongst these were the Hidden Words, that is the Kalamat Maknune from round about 1858, and the Book of Certitude, the Kitab-i-Iran from 1862. These books emphasized the importance of the spiritual path, outlined the practical, ethical, and religious goals of this path, and in the Iran provided the Babis with a clear account of their religious doctrines, particularly the concept of a succession of manifestations of God and the fulfillment of prophecy. Unlike the writings of the Bab, most of the writings of Baha'u'llah were readily accessible to ordinary literate Iranians, a factor that may have contributed to the growing leadership role taken by non-clerics in the Babi movement. Baha'u'llah also addressed new themes, notably the concerns of Islamic mysticism, Sufism, as in his book The Seven Varies, and he also made reference to biblical themes, including prophecy. Some of his other writings were more esoteric, however, including ecstatic poetry that referred to his continuing mystical experiences. Outside the Babi community, Baha'u'llah gained increasing sympathy from both residents and visitors in Baghdad, including Ottoman officials, Iranian notables, and even Sunni and Shi'i clerics. He was widely regarded as an important personage. Faced with the revival of Babism, the Iranian government sought to have Baha'u'llah expelled from Ottoman territory and returned to Iran. This the Ottoman authorities refused to do, instead inviting Baha'u'llah, now an Ottoman citizen, to come to Istanbul. He left Baghdad in May 1863 with a number of his disciples. It seems plausible that the authorities may have entertained the hope that the Babis might be useful to some political purpose, but any such hope was soon dashed. On arriving in the capital in August, Baha'u'llah refused to make any political contacts and remained aloof from government ministers. This attitude, combined with further representations from the Iranian ambassador, brought about a marked change in Ottoman dealings with the Babis, and in December 1863, Bahaullah and his extensive entourage were exiled to Edirne, the ancient Adrianople, in what is now the European part of Turkey. The period of Baha'u'llah's exile in Edirne, that is from December 1863 to August 1868, witnessed the final break between Baha'u'llah and his half-brother, and thereafter the development of the Baha'i Faith as a separate religion from Babism. Concealing his identity from most of the other Babis, Azal had joined Baha'u'llah's entourage on the journey from Baghdad. In Edirne, tensions rapidly mounted, the Baha'is accusing Azal of trying to murder Baha'u'llah. In 1866, at Baha'u'llah's direction, the Babi colony split between the respective followers of the two brothers, most siding with Baha'u'llah. Already in Baghdad, Baha'u'llah had gained the fervent devotion of a number of the Babis, and on the eve of his departure from that city, had announced a claim to spiritual authority to at least some of them. This announcement was made in the Garden of Rezvan in the period between 22nd of April and the 3rd of May 1863, an event later commemorated by Baha'is as marking the inauguration of his ministry. In Edirne, Baha'u'llah's claims were made generally known to the Babis, and messengers were sent to Iran to communicate them to their fellow believers there. Within a few years, the great majority of Babis had become Baha'is, accepting Baha'u'llah as the messianic figure of Man Yazharullah, that is, he whom God shall make manifest, foretold by the Bab. Of those Babis who did not accept these claims, some identified themselves as Azali Babis, whilst others remained unaffiliated with either group. In his subsequent writings, Baha'u'llah was to establish the laws and teachings of a new religion, but one theme had already emerged by the Edirne period, which served to distinguish the Baha'is both from the original Babis and the Azalis, and this was Baha'u'llah's strong emphasis on political quietism. The Baha'is were to eschew militancy and be loyal to established governments. The Azalis, by contrast, continued the traditions of religio-political action. Azal himself had been closely involved in the plot to assassinate the Shah, and some of his followers were to play a leading role in the political opposition movements that developed in late 19th century Iran. So I'll pause there and we'll continue next week talking about the Akka period. Thank you for listening. If you like these videos, you're welcome to subscribe to my channel. I'll try to answer any questions you may have about any of these videos in a future one. And if you want to support the development of the channel, you can do so through Patreon or PayPal. I'll give details below the video. You can also click the like button, it really is helpful, so that I can get an idea of which videos are of greatest interest to viewers. Have a good day.